Okay. So tonight we'll start with verse 8. So I'm just going to read the whole letter that is to Smyrna. And to the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these are the words of the first and the last, who was dead and came to life. I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich. I know the slander on the part of those who say that they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not fear what you are about to suffer. Beware, the devil is about to throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. And for 10 days you will have affliction. Be faithful until death, and I will give you the crown of life. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. Whoever conquers will not be harmed by the second death. So again, following the same model that the other letter follows, we have this opening that through the messenger of the church of Smyrna to the angel, these are the words of, instead of the first time, it was the person who holds the 7 stars and the 7 lamps. Now we have another depiction, the first and the last, the dead and came to life. So I want to show you a little bit about Smyrna, just because it's fun to look at the ancient cities. So Smyrna, this is an artist's depiction, was called the crown of Asia. It was considered to be the most beautiful city. They had a lot of pride in their city and how it looked. And this is probably a little bit after Christ was there, but roughly in the same time period.
Wow, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, so it's a big place right on the water.
I would like to go there.
Well, you can.
Yeah.
So you notice here at the bottom, this big theater-looking structure. That's still standing.
Well, doesn't look the same, but
Yeah, it's changed a little over 2,000 plus years.
this is true.
Wow.
But it's still there, still big. But that gives you an idea of when they have these kind of structures, their importance. Ephesus had the amphitheater we showed last time at Ephesus was even bigger. This one, it's a more closed-in, a proper theater instead of an amphitheater.
Didn't they have a temple to Artemis also?
Right in Ephesus.
Ephesus?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Which was one of the big draws there. Smyrna will have some of those things too, as we talk about, and Pergamum will be the other big one with religious structures. But so Smyrna, though, has a lot of, beautiful city, a bit of beautiful structure. And so it's another big commercial city. As you can see, a port. This is how the Romans would do their ports. They would build walls way out, and you have a little entrance and then a big circular thing to protect from the waves and all of that. Smyrna, which this nicely depicts, was one of the few planned cities in the ancient world. So it was built on a grid system, truly squared out. A lot of cities, even like Rome and others, would have sections of town that were planned, but all of Smyrna was. And the reason for that was, while the city was from before 1000 BC, it had burned down roughly between 600 to 500 BC. The whole thing had fallen in an invasion. And so it had been rebuilt. And when they rebuilt it, they built it very planned. And this leads to why people thought it was so beautiful. For those who participated in my chapter 21 of Revelation study, we talked about how a straight, planned city is considered beautiful and orderly compared to other ancient cities, which look like a bowl of spaghetti and the roads look like spaghetti in a bowl. They just go every which way, and then there's a wall that holds them all in. And so you see these nice straight streets. Part of why it was the crown. The other part, and none of this exists today, but you can see this hill here, this hill on the side actually goes up and is a little bit bigger, but it's all back behind us. It's what the person taking the picture is standing on. This hill had a number of towers on it and temples to Zeus, temples to Sible, and a few others. But one of the interesting things in it is that around the temples was what was called the Street of Gold. Much like what you hear, the streets of gold in heaven, right? Well, this was a literal one, not literal gold. It was gold colored stone. So it was yellow and painted that or whatever, but it gave the impression of this hill with these sort of big temple structures around it and then this gold ring. So that was called the crown. So it was literally the crown city, sometimes called the Queen City, all these sort of things. So there's a lot of this image going on here. And part of why that's important is the way John of Patmos writes to this church. He writes to their identity as who they are. When he says Jesus is the one who was dead and came back to life, he is writing to people in Smyrna saying, you are a city that was dead and came back to life. You were burned down and come back to life. And so in some ways, he's trying to build some parallels with their identity. And then at the end, he'll talk about crowns. We'll get to that in a minute. But this crown city, that was a free city and a big commercial hub. As a free city, it was, long before Rome controlled the ancient world. Rome way over here. Long before they had an empire coming out, they were only on Italy. They were pushing into Syracuse, pushing across the Adriatic into Greece. And Smyrna allied with Rome back then, way back, when Rome was just starting, and stayed allied with them the entire time. So Smyrna fought against the other Greek cities when they were trying to resist Rome and Roman invasion. And so that gave Smyrna a bit of a higher place in Roman society, in the Roman world. They were rewarded for their loyalty. People from Smyrna were known as loyal people. It is sort of a trait of the city, is their fidelity. But that brings us to some of the conflicts that they are having in their particular church. He mentions that they are experiencing affliction and poverty, and then he says they will be imprisoned. The affliction is the Greek word thlipsis, and it doesn't mean illness. It means to be beneath a crushing weight. And so the word affliction is accurate there. When you are under a heavy illness or disease, you do feel that burden. But it also, this idea that there's a lot of pressure on the church in Smyrna. Then he says they are struggling with poverty, even though you are rich. And it depends on the translation you read. Some of the translations will say, even though you are poor, but rich in spirit. The rich word there is not very well defined. So we don't really know when he says, even though you are rich, whether he means rich in money or rich in spirit or rich in humor. We don't know. That one's vague. But the poor word we do know, the poverty word we do. There are two words for poverty that show up in the New Testament. There is pania, which describes the state of a person who is not wealthy, but has what they need to live. So this is somebody who is getting by, maybe we might call it working poverty, like they get enough to eat every day and survive, but they don't have any extra things. But they would have been called poor. They don't have any capital, so they're poor or whatever. I know capital's not really a thing back then. But the other word, though, is tokeia, which means complete destitution, just totally having nothing. And that is the word used here, is tokeia. He says, so I know of your great burden, of this great pressure you feel, and I know of your complete destitution, is what he tells them. You know, just how hard you have it. So we have a church here in Smyrna that is really under it. They're under the thumb a little bit, perhaps more than Ephesus or others. And then when it gets to imprisonment, which shows up later, he says, I know you will be imprisoned. How does he say it? We'll throw some of you into prison so that you may be tested. He's going to they will be thrown in jail. He's predicting that they're going to continue to be persecuted. And imprisonment, we must remember, in the Roman and Greek world, it's not like you commit a crime and you go to prison. Like you stole a piece of bread, you don't go to prison for a year. Like they're not just hosting people in prison like we do now. You don't get assigned 20 years in jail. Prison is just one step before death. And it's pretty much a guaranteed thing. Going to prison, it means you're just waiting to die. So it's much more bleak thing. However, John says, you will go to prison, however, it will only be for 10 days, which is an interesting thing to say. So he's saying there will be a way to get out after a period of time, which is a good thing. And then that 10 days number, 10 is not one of our standard numbers that mean wholeness, which would be 3, 7, or 12. 10 is instead just less than 12. So it's less than a whole amount of time. That's sort of how that represents. When we think of 10, we're like, oh, that's a full set. No, you gotta act like it's too short of a dozen. And so that's the idea he's trying to communicate there. Is you're going to go to jail, you're going to be there for a time, but have hope you won't be there forever. And it won't be for a really long time.
This is a pretty bleak message altogether.
Yeah, so Smyrna is a church that's having it a lot harder than Ephesus.
Yeah.
And that kind of happened. Every city was very different. You know, these were free cities, so they had their own, kind of governments that could have been some version of democratic or republic-like. They tended to be ruled by, landowning wealthy elites, and then they may even elect their own king or have a monarch, but and so their relationship to the locals can be very different town to town. And that's one of the things I want to bring up here in Smyrna. And he brings it up in verse 9. I know the slander on the part of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. So what is your interpretation when you read that? What is that? What do you think that church in Smyrna is dealing with when you hear John writing that?
Maybe that there's a group of people who are saying they're Jews, but they're not behaving like it.
Or at least not as John sees. Well, and so, yeah, that's exactly what's going on. Smyrna has a large population of Jews. For whatever reason, they have a a large population and a wealthy one. They actually gave 10,000 denarius a year for city beautification. Or, so a very wealthy population and well-to-do.
They're not going to like this statement at all.
Well, they're not, but it's not written to them.
No, they might hear it though.
Oh, they might. But so the Jewish community in Smyrna would have lost people to the Christian upstart new religion. Many of the converts to the Christian way are going to be ex-Jewish persons. I mean, the majority of the church early on, even in the Greek world, were people connected to Jewish communities. And then some Greeks would come in over time, or Ionians where we are here. But so there would have been some conflict. It happens even today. Churches can be very territorial about, you know, do we let people go to other churches? They might like it better there and never come back. You know, we never say it out loud, but that it's part of our culture. It's, you know, one church does one thing, one church does another, and we don't team up that well all the time. Even amongst Methodists, we don't always get along with other Methodists. I'm dealing that in a property dispute right now. Two churches sharing a building but don't want to merge as one church, but there's reasons for that kind of stuff. But so there is some conflict going on in town between this new Jewish denomination, which is essentially what it is. So it's this other way of being Jewish is this Christian way. They're going to use the same synagogues. They're talking about the same God. And a lot of people aren't going to love that, especially if you are a well-to-do Jewish person who gains a lot of power by being important in a large community. If your community is shrinking and breaking off, and especially in a community that is totally destitute, so you have this other sort of Jewish denomination break off that the poor people are flocking to, the rich community is not necessarily going to love that. So we see some conflicts going on here. And then when it says synagogue of Satan, what it means is it's a church of liars or whatever. He's just insulting them. He's not literally meaning the devil. He just means a church of evil or something working against the faith.
It's 2020. It's 2020 day, and we know all about that.
But to give you an idea about some of this sort of persecution that can happen in some of these towns, I'm going to share some of the rumors that are spread in Roman culture and in the Greek and Roman worlds. This is stuff we found records of. So one of them I brought up before was that Christians were cannibals because we eat the actual blood and drink, or we eat the actual body and drink actual blood. And we made this whole thing. There was this whole rumor of we'd take babies and bake them in bread, and that's how we tricked people into doing it. It's the whole thing. But that's one thing being charged against Christians. And all of these are just more and more pressure that's applied to the church. One of the other ones is because Christians would share a common meal as part of their worship, often at the end, often called the agape meal, the love meal. What do you think the rumor was about that? Let's go to church and have a love meal. What do you think you're doing at that feast?
Like the Temple of Artemis, maybe.
Orgy.
Yep.
Right. Immorality, sexual immorality. Yeah.
So the rumor against Christians, and it didn't help that these Nicolaitans in some towns were doing this, were having a little extra fun after their coffee hour was a little more interesting.
Adults only.
So some other rumors going on was Christianity often split families. And there are many lines in the New Testament about you need to hate your mother, father, brother, sister. You need to separate from family who are not believers. And so the common thing was that Christians break families, they steal children, they tamper with the family unit.
Hmm.
Which I know you think about like what, I don't know, I think of like 80s evangelical Republicans. It's all about the family, or even today, I guess. But I just can see the old TV commercials from back in the day.
So Dane, what about the basic issue of these are Christian Jews because it wasn't really its own church yet. So they're saying the Messiah has come. But then there are other Jews who I guess believe that in town that would be like, well, the Messiah hasn't come yet. So would that be part of it?
Well, and that's where it gets even more confusing in some ways. For the Jews, yes, it's that they're saying the Messiah has come and it's not. But then you've got all these others around there too. You've got some that are accusing the Christians of being atheist because they do not have images. And this was one that was pressed against all Jews in the Roman and Greek world, because especially in the early days, they took the no graven images from Exodus very literally. There were no images of God or even Jesus for a long time. The whole like crucifix on a cross image comes way later. And so there's a common claim that Christians are atheists, which is even worse in the Roman world. And then, of course, the Christians will not call Caesar Lord, which then gets into language things about what the word Lord means, whether it's divine, whether it's master, whether it's husband, whether like there's this whole, the term Baal, which you see, or Baal or Baal, however you would pronounce it, different ways. And the Old Testament, all that means is Lord, master, or husband. So not calling Caesar that is also not calling him God, but so there's a lot of conflict there. So people didn't like them for that. Again, that also would apply to the Jews in general. And so this is all just, and then the last one was Christians were upstarts and revolutionaries because they were always talking about the end of the world, that Jesus was going to come tomorrow. And the Romans thought that was ridiculous. And Jews especially thought that was ridiculous because the Savior hadn't come in the first place. How's he going to come again? So they were these firebrands talking about the end of the world all the time. And if you, not Revelation, but if you read, especially in the Gospels, when they talk about he's going to come back, they're talking about tomorrow. This generation won't even be dead by the time he comes back. That's what Jesus said. So you have all this. So this is all churning some more. This is all churning more in the rumor mill in some cities than it is in others. So the city of Smyrna, for whatever reason, at this time of the writing, was really under the pressure of this church. They were particularly poor and under all this pressure. And they were getting jailed, but there's hope. And what he appeals to is their loyalty. And what he says is, if the church in Ephesus needs love, Smyrna, you just need loyalty, which is something you're used to doing. You're a loyal people that live in that town. That's sort of your identity. That's what you're known as. And so loyalty is the thing Smyrna needs to be known by. They need to just be faithful, even unto death. And so, and then in being loyal to Christ, if they just hang in there and hold on to that loyalty, they will receive the crown of life, which is also just a great poetic kind of turnaround. They're living in the crown of Asia. Well, you're going to receive more than what any crown that the city is. You're going to receive a crown of the whole world, a crown of life. Um,
Can I ask a question?
yes.
So, but couldn't you also interpret verse 9 as that I know your affliction and your poverty, even though you are rich? So he's saying you're rich, but couldn't it be a poverty of spirit?
It could be. We don't know what the word rich means. We know the poor means total destitution, but that could be of the spirit as well. And so they could be under so much pressure. I mean, could be like we're feeling right now during kind of COVID lockdown. There's all this pressure, there's all this extra burden that people are losing spirit. I mean, you can look at, there's tons of data. I just saw this big article about domestic violence is through the roof right now, and suicide rates and all these sort of things are up just because of the way things are right now. And so, yeah, I think you could argue that he's talking about spirit. I'm inclined to go in the more physical route just because of the word choice that that poverty word is, and because Smyrna is a rich city with a rich population of Jews, and that, to me, that points to there's some class conflict in Smyrna that maybe wasn't happening in Ephesus, because we do know there's plenty of Christian churches where there's both slaves and freed slaves and then owners of slaves. Like, we do know there's some, but maybe Smyrna wasn't like that. Maybe they were all at the bottom. So I don't know, but you definitely could. And I think in both cases, the answer is still loyalty. The answer is still kind of perseverance. You're going to have a hard time, but if you just hang in there, the crown will be yours, is the message there. Are there any other thoughts on the church in Smyrna, this message to Smyrna? And again, they bring up the word conquers. You know, this is, by persevering, you will conquer. You will make it through. You'll have victory. Those kind of, war language. But from what is described, it sounds like they're in a war, be it spiritual or economic or prejudice, whatever it is.
Well,
I totally understand that says the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not. He's saying the people who are slandering you say they're Jews and they're not.
So yeah, he's saying that there are people speaking against you. That's all these kind of rumors we're talking about. And he's saying they identify themselves as Jews. And he's talking about the Jewish population of Smyrna. And he's saying, but they are not Jews because they don't rest. I'm trying to stay away from, but we'll just jump in. John of Patmos is anti-Semitic. Okay.
settles it.
I'll just put it out there. As we read through Revelation, the Jews are not his friends. And part of that is because of conflicts occurring at that time in the world. The Christians are breaking off, they're growing. The second temple has been destroyed. So you're not getting as much worshiping together in the actual Jerusalem that we started with. And so the conflict between the Christians and the sort of traditional Jews is growing. And it's not a physical armed conflict, though it will become that eventually to some degree. So yeah, that's what's going on. He's insulting the Jewish synagogues. I mean, he calls the synagogue of Satan. I mean, that's a massive insult.
He might mean the leadership, though, like Jesus did, the Pharisees. Or not.
Well, the people he means are the people who are speaking. He's saying if they are speaking against you, and many of them are, then they are not good Jews.
Okay.
Because they should be worshiping the same God we are. We should be doing this together. They should be following Christ.
That's right.
So, but you know, that's in the year 90. This is a very different world and a very different thing today. Because and a lot of people over thousands of years have used some of these lines to go do a lot of killing. And that is not a good thing. And that is not what this is talking about. In fact, he says he is not telling them at all to go fight back. He's telling them to just stand there and take it.
And then, right.
But in time, you will be saved. Right?
Yeah,
So the
Dane, I have a study Bible, and it has like a couple notes on this. Like it said in there that evidently in the city there's a large and actively hostile Jewish population that made it extremely difficult to live there as a Christian. And then that was a comment they had on verse 8. And then on verse 9, it was a bold metaphor directed against unbelieving and hostile Jews in Smyrna who were persecuting Christians.
Mhm.
So at that time, would the Jewish folks be able to be the ones that were throwing the Christians in jail? Or would that be something they'd have to bring up to the Rome, similar to back in Jesus' day when that's how they got him in jail?
Well, so in Smyrna, it's a free city, so they don't have to get Rome to
Oh, okay.
prove anything. And so
Okay.
it's only within the local city officials. And
Mhm.
a large population, they probably have a city quarter that is the Jewish quarter, or
Mhm.
a section of town where their synagogue is. And this is the same synagogue the Christians would have wanted to worship.
Right.
The Christians
Right.
wanted to be going to that synagogue to do their work.
Mhm.
They're probably being denied that. They're probably being pushed out. And yeah, a lot of synagogues in that day and time are functioning as what we would say a government. They have a police, they have a guard,
Okay.
prison,
Yeah.
judges and courts.
Okay.
That's like, so yeah, some of that's there and it's a very real sort of persecution. And so this church in Smyrna is getting it probably both ways. They're getting it from the Jewish neighbors and they're getting it from the Greek/Roman neighbors. So
Right.
they're having a hard time.
Right.
For whatever
Okay, thank
reason,
you.
Ephesus didn't have that trouble.
Right.
And we're about to go to Pergamum. They're not having that trouble. So, it's unique to that church. But,
Mm-hmm.
so what does this communicate to us today? We talked about how Ephesus, we could kind of take of don't get too stuck in your ways that you forget what love is. This is something we can take from Ephesus today. What can we take from Smyrna today? What's sort of our bring it to the future lesson?
Hang in there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I think
Yeah.
you mentioned it before. I mean, just what we're living through right now, there's just, in fact, I think I heard a survey today, 80% of Americans are just under so much stress right now. We just, for everybody, there's something that we're all dealing with. So, as you said, we just have to hang in there. We all feel like we're being, persecuted and under a heavy weight. So we just have to have faith and keep moving.
Yeah, you got to hang in there. And I mean, it's, I just heard about this thing happening 10 days from now or something, some big event in the country. It's like freaking everybody out. Like, I don't know. It's just one thing on top of everything else. These boats.
I did notice, though, I came to Baltimore from Florida, where I lived for quite a long time, and I noticed that here in the city, there's an attitude in a lot of places about Christians, very skeptical, very not a very nice attitude. It's not cool. You don't want to be found to be, a believer because that's just a crutch. I've come across that already.
Maybe. I mean, I would definitely say there's some cultural differences between South and North, and Baltimore's kind of in the middle. And so it kind of gets some weird both of, in the South, everybody says they're a Christian, but what they're actually doing could be totally different. And in the North, nobody says they're a Christian, but they may actually be living it.
Actually,
So,
right.
All right.
but so, I mean, it's just some weird cultural difference. But I mean, and so in some ways, that's even a great example of, now Smyrna and Ephesus are much closer together than like Baltimore and Florida, but it doesn't take much distance for there to be some differences about what's going
Exactly.
on. So I want to kind of move us now to Pergamum. It should go a little quicker. It's not as interesting.
We don't have as many problems.
Well, different problems and problems we've already talked about. So go back to our map here. I'll show you, so we're going up here to Pergamum. We've gone from Ephesus to Smyrna. Now we're going up to Pergamum. One of the important things here, and they don't have it on the map. So there is a road that goes here and then off, and then there is a road that connects those two, but then goes here and then down and over. Pergamum's not on either of those. This is the Silk Road stuff. Well, and then there's like a road that's up here where it goes to Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, whatever you want to call it. Pergamum's not in any of that. Pergamum is on a mountain of sorts, on a kind of a hill. And so it functions very differently. It is not a commercial center. It is not a huge city. It's a little bit different. Here is the city of Pergamum, or well, Acropolis, the kind of the top of the town. So it's built on a massive kind of hilltop. And what you'll see here is you can see the outer walls.
Wow.
So this is the wall, would have come around here. And then there would have been a wall that came here. And then there's probably more walls that come out for the outside. You see here, this is what would have been the temple complex, the main temple. We'll talk about who's in that temple in a minute. But it also would have been your government areas, all that kind of stuff. You probably would have had the proconsul's offices and palaces would have been up here as well inside the center temple. And then you can see here what is a just ginormous amphitheater built into the hill.
Yeah.
And it's very steep too. So it's kind of a small area at the top. It would have been your like main market and temple area, but then this huge amphitheater. But that's because it's not a trading town. It is a government town. And it's built on a hilltop, so it's very defensible. It overlooks a great deal of area. And so this is the sort of citadel of Asia, and so where the governor lives and very protected. Now it would have, in the ancient days, would have had a lot more little villages and stuff all around it. And so there would have been a lot more buildings looking here. So it doesn't look, there wouldn't have been as much green here, but you can kind of get the idea. But it's very different looking compared to Smyrna, which that was a rendition of Smyrna, but still, that was a much larger, much more populous kind of area, and not very defensible when it comes to military warfare. You can be invaded by the water and also by armies on land. It's not great, but on top of a mountain, it's a lot harder to get to you. When I say mountain, it wasn't a very big mountain, but still, it was big for that area.
Do we think that John went to all these places
He may have before.
personally?
I mean, they're not terribly far apart. There may be a few days walk between each other. And like most of them are on those major roads where there's tons of caravans and people moving all the time. And so it would have been very normal to walk along up and down. I mean, Paul goes to most of these at one point or another. And so, yeah, he probably went to all these at some point. And so we have the city of Pergamum. It is the capital of Asia. It's the governor's seat, so not a free city. It was, however, well known for its sort of cultural significance because it was sort of this royal town kind of as a way. It was famous for its library, which I couldn't find any good pictures of, but the library was known to have over 200,000 scrolls in it, which would have been second only to the Library of Alexandria, which was eventually burned and flooded and destroyed. So, I mean, this was a massive seat of the ancient world here at the north of the Mediterranean. Even the fact the word parchment is actually derived from the town name, Pergamum, if you go back into the Greek or whatever. So our term parchment actually means sheet from Pergamum. It was known as a great religious center and sort of a seat of ancient Greek culture. Pergamum as a city is really ancient. Right? We're going back to Troy, ancient. And so it was considered kind of a custodian of Greek culture. It actually resisted some of the Roman cultural takeover. They like to use the old old Greek names for all the gods and things like that. And so there were 2 temples here. There was a temple to Zeus, and then the special temple in Pergamum was Asclepios. Has anybody heard the Greek god Asclepios?
No.
You've actually seen images of it more than you think.
Okay.
And I forgot to pull one up, but let me pull up here. Let me just Google it real fast. No, hold on.
While you're Googling, can you spell it too?
It's a god of medicine.
It is the god of medicine.
Oh, Hippocrates. Good.
So, yeah, there's a few different ways to say it. And depending on whether you're reading Latin, Egyptian, or Greek, what the version
So
is.
how did you say it, Dane?
Asclepios.
Asclepios.
So Asclepios.
Oh, okay.
But that is the same one. So here is the image
Oh, mhm.
of
Yeah,
Asclepios.
we all know this. We just didn't know
Yeah.
it by that name.
Hippocrates, yeah.
Right, Hippocrates
Mhm.
is from Pergamum.
Pergamum.
Interesting.
So the serpent as a symbol of medicine is an ancient symbol throughout the Mediterranean world, but is best known as the symbol of Asclepios. However, it is also in Exodus, Moses puts this bronze serpent on a staff to heal people. So it is also Jewish. But so you've all seen that many times on the sides of ambulances and hospitals and all that kind of stuff. But that's where the image comes from, of the Greek serpent image of Asclepios as the god of healing. This was also a part of Apollo, and Asclepios is Apollo's child in some ways, and so there's a lot of connection and argument that they're the same person, whatever. You can get into mythology another day. But yeah, so Pergamum is a great library. It has this great temple to Asclepios, which is essentially a giant hospital right on top of a mountain in the middle of a citadel. It's a good thing to have. Asclepios is known in kind of 2 ways. One is the serpent, and the second is with the title, the Savior. Asclepios Soter, so the Savior, because he heals. So why do you think a Christian might have a few conflicts with a Greek god who is a Greek god who is a physician, which you can think of some New Testament language about that, is represented by a serpent and is called the Savior.
Yeah. Yeah, that would be a big issue there.
Right. There's a lot of shared symbology that Christians are going to be like, no.
Yeah, you get your serpent there with
Idol.
Adam and Eve.
Right. You're going to think about that,
Yeah.
that devil or
Devil.
that Satan or that whatever. I would, if you read Genesis, and nowhere does it say it's Satan, but by
Right,
the time of Jesus, they were
right.
convinced it was. And by this time, they were convinced it was. So serpent equals Satan. That's a problem. And there's only one Savior, Jesus, and Jesus is the great physician, the great healer who overcomes.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And so everything about that temple and that worship in Pergamum is some big conflict. And so that is why Pergamum is called, where does he say it? He says it right here, Satan's throne.
Satan's
So now I just realized I hadn't read it yet. I hadn't read it to y'all. So I'm going to read out the chapter real quick, or the end of the Pergamum letter. To the angel of the church in Pergamum, write, these are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. I know where you are living, where Satan's throne is. Yet you are holding fast to my name, and you did not deny your faith in me, even in the days of Antiochus, my witness, my faithful one, who was killed among you, where Satan lives. But I have a few things against you. You have some there who hold to the teaching of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the people of Israel, so that they would eat food sacrificed to idols and practice fornication. So you also have come to hold to the teaching of the Nicolaitans. Repent then. If not, I will come to you soon and make war against them with the sword of my mouth. Let anyone who has an ear listen to what the Spirit is saying to the churches. To everyone who conquers, I will give some of the hidden manna, and I will give a white stone. And on the white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. So Pergamum is Satan's throne. And now we can kind of understand why he might call it that when there's this giant temple complex to a god that shares a lot of symbols and vocabulary with Christian faith. And so it's not a friendly relationship they're going to have. And so then also that address at the beginning, these are the words of him who has the sharp two-edged sword. And so we're talking about Christ has the sword coming out of his mouth and the chapter 1 imagery of him, right? And we talked about that as the word, be it the scriptures, the text. He talks about, I'm going to use the sword of my mouth. That is, in some ways, the sword of the tongue. I will, cut with the tongue some of these things and with truth. But there's also another image happening here, and that Pergamum is the seat of the proconsul, which is the high governor of Asia. So, this is the person over this entire area. One guy ruling essentially over this whole area. And the proconsul, so is essentially a king that reports then back to the emperor in Rome. And large governors like this, a proconsul, would have had ius gladii, or gladii, which is the power of the sword. If a proconsul looks at you and wants to kill you, they need only say it, that you are to die and you will be killed. No trial, no courts, no petitions to the emperor, no anything. If a proconsul wants to execute you, it is done. And it's an immense amount of power. Is the power of a sword. And so that power sits in Pergamum as the headquarters of the proconsul. And so when John writes this letter to Pergamum, He is saying from the words who has the sharp two-edged sword, from the person who has the sharp two-edged sword. And he doesn't mean the governor, he means Jesus. There's a power that overcomes the governor's power. And so that's where we see, again, he's writing, that's why I'm going into all these history of these cities, is because his writing is very specific to them, and connects them to what is going on. And again, Pergamum as the sort of seat of the proconsul is seen. It's kind of funny, you have hospitals and things all about healing and life, but there's a power of death. And yet those who persevere in Pergamum will be given the bread of life, essentially. They'll be giving the manna of heaven. This is the bread which the Lord has given you to eat, and is interpreted by the Christian community as, the bread of life which Jesus gives as part of the communion bread. And so they,
Well, and
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I like the imagery of like that's tailored to each of the churches. So like it was the words of him who is the first and the last for Smyrna, and they were supposed to be faithful. And then here it's the words of the sharp double-edged sword for someone that is more, for the one that is more powerful than both their governor or proconsul and their gods, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean, he's very specific. And so if he was to write a letter to Baltimore, he would be, from the one who eats crabs to the people in love with ravens. Like, it'd be something, it would obviously be more meaningful than that. But to some degree, that's what's happening, is he's connecting the parts of the body to the greater body, right? And so he's connecting the parts of, these separate churches to each other because they are all represented and connected to Christ. And so there is a sort of poetry and action happening here. And remember, all of this vision and all of this writing occurs as one single thing. And so you're intended to read all these letters and you're intended to pick out, okay, a church needs to have love. That's what Ephesus needs to be. A church needs to have loyalty, like Smyrna. And the Pergamon one, they need to have life, or the ability to overcome power. This one's a little harder to pin down in a single word.
What is the white stone?
So that's the last thing I'm going to hit tonight, and then we'll stop. So the white stone, yeah. So obviously we have a new name and a new, how do they phrase it? I'll give you the white stone. The white stone is written a new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. There's a few things happening here. Part of it is ancient Jewish legend or rabbinic legend and rabbinic writings. So not in scripture, but in writings about scripture. There's a legend that with the manna coming from heaven came white stones as precious gifts down to the people. You can find a few Renaissance paintings and different things that have like diamonds falling with manna, and the people collected it up. There's also the idea that, so that's one interpretation. Another interpretation, the ancient world uses colored stones for counting, right? You might have one white stone means 1, a black one means 5, a red one means 10, or something to that number. It would have been 3, 12, 7, and 12, and weird stuff to us, but that kind of idea. So then the interpretation is you are given a stone to be counted. You will be counted amongst the faithful. Because you have a counting stone, you will be counted. Another interpretation, and it's not to say any of these are correct, it's probably a collection of all of the ideas. But some of the ancient law courts and ancient juries would use white and black stones to do guilty and not guilty. The white stone meaning not guilty or innocent.
Well, there are groups who use that, or who used to use that, the issue of blackballing. You know, when you
Right.
blackball someone, yeah, groups would
Right.
yeah,
You would push all
throw in a
black.
white stone to accept someone and a black ball to decline. Yeah.
Exactly. And so, yeah, I mean, and that one's a kind of a world over of using two different color stones but to designate the two. But that comes up in the idea of one, you are given the white stone representing innocence or acquittal or pardon before God. So again, counted. Then you've got another idea that deals with sort of the power that Pergamum sort of represents. There were these tablets of stone called a tesserae in the ancient Roman world, which would have been something carried by governors and rulers and would have held on them important laws or list of names of important persons. And so this in some ways is you have been given a tesserae with your name on it by God. And so you have been made powerful or made important. You have a symbol of power now. And of course, lastly, the new name means new life. And so this is your name recorded in the book of life, right? You're given whatever this new name is. And this was a practice not only in Christian life, but all over. The first emperor of Rome is called Emperor Augustus, but his name was Octavian or Octavius. But when he is made emperor, he becomes Augustus. And so it oftentimes, there's a lot of traditions where, even in the Christian tradition, for thousands of years, you had no name until baptism. You were not even given a name until you were baptized. And then, so you might, and so you would generally baptize children. You might wait a few weeks at high infant mortality rates in the ancient world. And then when they were baptized, they were healthy enough, you baptize them, give them a name. That's their new name. And then, of course, we did this with whenever outside groups would convert, they would take on a Christian name, force it upon people. We did that to a whole lot of people, with forcing Christian names, but the idea being you were given a new name. This is the one that's on your stone in heaven.
Okay.
And then there's some practice of, and some argument to that is why we do headstones the way we do. You have a headstone with your name on it, and so therefore you're recorded. And you have your place in heaven. You have been given your white stone. So that is where we will stop. The other cities aren't going to be near as interesting. And like, they'll
Boy,
start.
it's a mouthful.
Yeah, and like they had problems with the Nicolaitans and Balaam. I think Pergamum's problem is they compromise with power. So if Ephesus, they have a problem with love. Smyrna, I don't know if they have a problem with loyalty, but they just have to persevere. They have a problem with persecution, I guess. Pergamum's problem is they compromise with power and culture and what's around them. They're living in a seat of power with a lot of outside influence, and they succumb to it. Ephesus resisted. Remember, he praises them for resisting. But Pergamum, they succumb to it. The Nicolaitans are amongst them. They're doing those practices. And so he says, there is something more powerful than the power you're used to knowing and this culture you're used to knowing, and you need to get out of that. You need to get counted with this other group. So,
Okay.
anything else?
Nope.
I know there's a lot.
That was a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Verses.
Yeah.
But I'm also taking the time to tell you about these ancient cities just to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's good.
Because you always
Historical
hear
background.
about Jerusalem. You always hear about like Egypt. Like you don't get to talk a whole lot about the Ionian
Other
coast.
cities, yeah.
Yeah. No, you don't.
Well, context is important, so that's good, yeah.
Well, it's going to make other things go a lot faster because throughout the rest of the vision, he's going to go referencing back to
That.
the throne of Satan or these, the crown of this or whatever. And he's making all these hints back to these churches. And so if we understand them now, it makes it easier later.
Great.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks.
good
All
evening.
right. Good night.
Good night, everybody.